Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for clicking on my channel. I'm Peter the Book Lover. I want to thank you for being here. I have a YouTube channel to where I talk about books and I also talk about movies, and I have a great time doing it. Hopefully, you'll have a good time being in here as well. And I want to say that I'm making a video right now. It's going to be called Reading Adventures. This is where I'm going to talk about the literature that I read in the past and the literature that I plan on reading in the future. And yeah, I'm having a great time doing it. So let's get into this. Now, what I've been doing lately is working very well for me. I kind of do this book juggling. I'm not reading like 10 books at a time, but I'm doing 3 books at a time. And I've got 3 different types of books that I read. And it's working really well because I'm reading them simultaneously. And it's actually really a good idea for me. You know, it might not work for you, but this works for me. And what I'm doing is the 3 types that I'm doing a reread. There's a bunch of books that I want to read more than once, and I really find rereading is very rewarding experience for me, because a lot of times when I get through the book the second time, it's actually more enjoyable the second time because I see the story a little bit more clearer, and my comprehension is a little bit better of the story. And, you know, like things they mentioned in the beginning of the story, you already know where they're going with what they're talking about. So rereading books really works for me. So I'm always going to have books that I'm rereading. Then I'm going to do my adult literature, and that's going to be like new books to me that are for adults. And then I do children's literature. And children's literature, I'm not talking about like children's literature. I'm talking about like stuff like Charlotte's Web, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, books like that. Harry Potter, you know, books that you could read in a short period of time. And that way I could read like 5 of those. Then I have one book that I'm rereading, and then one book that I'm reading. And yeah, doing these at the same time simultaneously really works really well. And let's just get into my rereads first. And the book that I just finished rereading is The Last of the Mohicans by James Fenimore Cooper. This is a really wonderful book. This came out about 1827, I believe. And this is set in 1757 or something like that. And what this is about is this is at the time to where French and England are fighting over America before it's America. And the French are using the Indians to help them. And this is an adventure story. I'm not going to go over all the parts, but this has character called Hawkeye. He's a white person, but he is kind of like living with these Indians, and he's got 2 Indian companions in this story. Jing-Jacques is the father of Uncas. Uncas is another Indian, and they're really wonderful characters. It's really great hanging out with them. And this story is about this other character called Duncan Hayward, and he's escorting these 2 ladies. They're Cora and Alice Monroe, and he's escorting them to her father, which is the English leader. You know, he's like the English captain of everybody. So he's escorting to them, and he's got a guide with them. And on the way, they run into this guy named David Gamout, and he pretty much stays with them for pretty much the whole adventure. And they have a guide called Magua. La Subtil is another name they call him. And he is a villain, but, you know, you find that out really early. And he goes from being led by Magua, which was actually leading them into a trap and ambushes and stuff, to going with Hawkeye, Jing-Jacques, and Uncas. And they go to find Henry Monroe, which is the captain of the British people. And then there's this, you know, I don't want to get into it, but there's a lot of adventures in this story. There's one part of this story that's really brutal. It's got a really tragic ending. You've got a double funeral at the end of the story. And yeah, and this is was a really wonderful read. This is a really great classic. It was really popular back in the day, and I think that it was really popular because people probably did a lot of rereading back then. And this is a story that gets better the more times you read it. And yeah, like I say, there's a lot of things in this book that I enjoyed the first time, but I definitely enjoyed a lot more the second time. And it's a really wonderful book, and I highly recommend it. The Last of the Mohicans. Really great book. And the book that I'm rereading now, I'm read part one. This is The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman, and this is a really interesting story. This is part of a 3-part series, and the main character is Lyra. She's at this college, and she actually sneaks into a room and sees some information. And this is set in London, but in this London, it's not the same London as in the real world, because everybody in this world has a demon. And the demon is not a demon like an evil demon. It's like a part of your soul. And her demon, Lyra's demon, is Pantalaimon, and he's a really interesting character. Now, when you're young, your demon can change into whatever animal it wants. Like, it could be a bird 1 second, it could be a cat the next second, it could be anything it wants to be. It depends on how it feels. And then when you're an adult, it stays in one form. It stops changing, you know. And there's these people kidnapping children. So they're called gobblers. And one of Lyra's friends winds up getting kidnapped, and she wants to figure out who's doing this kidnapping. And she winds up being given the alethiometer, which is the golden compass. But she doesn't know how to use it, so she's got to figure out how to use it. Like, you know, Luke Skywalker, but no Obi-Wan to guide her. So she has to learn this, and as the story goes along, she actually winds up traveling pretty far, but she actually learns who her parents are during this story, and her parents are unique characters. And this adventure that she goes on, she goes out to the north, pretty much the South Pole or something like that, and she actually runs into a bunch of characters, but she runs into a bear, and she actually befriends this bear. And then as this story goes along, there's a death match between these two bears. It's one of my favorite parts of the story. I'm not at that part now, but yeah, this bear is a wonderful character, and there's a bunch of adventures. This ends in a weird way, but you've got 3 books, so it ends in a way that, you know, you might want to read the second book to find out where it's going. But yeah, this is a really strong argument for reading books, because there's certain things that you hear about in the beginning of the story. When you first read it, you don't know what they're talking about, but you being through this before, you know where is it going. Yeah, and it's a really interesting adventure. There's a lot of exciting things that happen in this story. I've watched the movie and I've read the book, and I think the book is better than the movie, but it's worth watching the movie if you want to read the book, because it actually, you could picture people like Nicole Kidman. I picture as Mrs. Coulter, you know. It's really cool story, and I'm enjoying it quite a bit so far. Now, let me talk about the adult reads that I'm reading for the first time. I'm finally reading The Gunslinger by Stephen King, and I have 2 different copies. And this is kind of a story that's like Lord of the Rings, but like a Western style Lord of the Rings. You're in this like off-world, and there's a lot of flashbacks in this story, but you've got these 2 characters, Rowland, the gunslinger, and he's going with this kid, Jake. Jake was one time in New York, but he's like in this world, and they're hunting down the man in black, and they're going after him, and they're going a long journey. They run into a rail car that they get on, and they wind up running into all these slow mutants, and they're kind of like zombies. They reminded me of zombies, And it's a pretty interesting story, but one thing that you'll know about this is that this is like the beginning to a long journey. You know, this is like the first part of like a 3,000 page story. So now what's interesting is that I was reading this first, but then I had to travel, so I grabbed this one and I started reading this one because I wanted to make sure that I didn't travel with this one, because this is a more rarer book and I didn't want to get it damaged. So I took this one, but by switching to this one, I found out that this has an intro by Stephen King and two intros by Stephen King, and this one has an afterword by Stephen King. So it was really interesting reading these stories. When I say this is a Western and this is like Lord of the Rings, he even explains this in the beginning, and he explains the little things about writing and everything. And I plan on going further in the series, but since this is like the introduction, there's not a lot of things explained. Although you do get a brief period of Rowland's youth, and you find a little bit about Jake, but I don't think Jake is going to be a character in the later novels. But yeah, it's really interesting so far. I'm glad to finally get around to reading The Gunslinger by Stephen King. Really interesting. And now I'm reading something by J.R.R. Tolkien. Of course, you know The Lord of the Rings, you know The Hobbit, and The Silmarillion. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Now I've got this one. This is Children of Hurin, and this is written by J.R.R. Tolkien. And the thing about it is that I'm listening to an audiobook and I'm reading along to the audiobook. And it's kind of essential because there's a lot of names in this story that are very hard to pronounce. You know, it gets easier as you go along with the book. I mean, you know, I can pronounce these names, but when you come across them the first time, they're kind of hard to pronounce. So it's a really helpful aid reading along with this audiobook. And the person that's reading it really does a great job with this audiobook. And this isn't a really exciting story, but it's very interesting, and it's very much in the style of J.R.R. Tolkien, although it doesn't have, it has some characters that are repetitive, but it doesn't have the magic like The Hobbit has. The Hobbit is one of my favorite novels of all time, and Lord of the Rings is one of my favorite novels. You know, that trilogy is amazing. I really love that. Now, I'm still pretty much at the beginning. I'm at like page 80, 81, 80 and 81, and this is like a 247 page book, so I'm kind of like a third of the way there. And you know, it's not boring, it's not really grab you in the beginning, you know what I mean? And this is another book that I could see me wanting to reread in the future. But it's pretty interesting. This is unique. I don't know if you've heard about this. Let me know in the comments if you've heard of this book, because it's new to me. I've heard of Silmarillion. I believe that's how you pronounce that. But it's pretty interesting, and I'm enjoying it so far, especially with the audiobook, because the guy's doing a fantastic job. Now, I've also read some children's novels. I've read these 5 books right here. This is a book series. This is Who Was and What Was book series, and these are really wonderful. The first one that I read was Who Was Leonardo da Vinci. Now, Leonardo da Vinci, you know, the Mona Lisa is a famous drawing that everybody knows, the famous painting that everybody knows, and it's a beautiful painting. It's really awesome to look at, man. For some reason, it's just a simple painting, but it's just amazing and it's world famous. He also left behind this notebook with all these wonderful ideas. He was a fantastic artist. He could draw fantastically because he was actually trained. He didn't grow up with his parents. His parents kind of separated when he was younger, and he's kind of moved around. And he didn't have a lot of successes in life. Like, there's this one example to where he tried to build this horse statue, not by his fault, but there was a war that happened, and his statue wound up getting destroyed. You also run into Michelangelo. He's in this story as well. But yeah, this was pretty interesting. I like learning about Leonardo da Vinci. And this notebook that he left behind was really revolutionary. There's a lot of ideas he had in the 1400s that really are modern stuff, you know what I mean? So Leonardo da Vinci was a really interesting character to read about. Then the next one I read was Who Was Amadeus Mozart? And he's a person that learned how to play music at a really young age, like 3 years old. And he had a sister that was taught to play music as well, but he went further in music than she did. He wrote a bunch of symphonies at a really young age. And because he was so young, a lot of people didn't want to work with him. And he had a father, Leopold. He was pretty domineering, and he was always telling him what to do and being very controlling of his life. And yeah, interesting thing, when he was really younger, he ran into Marie Antoinette when she was betrothed to Louis the 14th, but he kind of had a crush on her. He really liked her, and he was kind of like hitting on her, but she couldn't date him because she was already betrothed to get married to Louis the 14th. Who knows? You know what I mean? It didn't turn out well for her being married to Louis the 14th. If you know her history a little bit, she's a very interesting character in my opinion. I'm kind of fascinated with that character. Let them eat cake. Yeah, but if you're a fan of Amadeus the movie, it's not accurate to his actual life. His actual life was quite different. He got married. He dated a couple women, but I believe he married one person, and he had some children. And he did die at a young age, but it didn't have all that stuff with Salieri, the composer that he was in competition with. But that movie is amazing. I still really love that movie. But there's a lot of movies like They Died with Their Boots On is a lot different than the actual George Armstrong Custer. But I still love movies like that, like Titanic. Who knows if there was the Rose story and Jack story, you know what I mean? But I still love that movie. That's an amazing movie. And then I read Who Were the Beatles? And the thing about it is, when I started reading this book, I said to myself, I'm probably not going to learn a lot from this book because it's going to cover a lot of things that I already knew. And it did. It covered a lot of things that I already knew, but there was some things that I learned by reading this book. The way this book starts out is really cool. It goes over John's life before the Beatles, then it covers Paul's life before the Beatles, then it covers Ringo's life before the Beatles, and then it also covers George Harrison's life before the Beatles, and how they started other bands, and how they actually formed, how they became famous in England through a lot of hard work. And then they wind up flying to America, and America, girls were fainting all over the place and screaming, and they started doing concerts and became really famous. Also, how they went on the Ed Sullivan Show and how it became really popular. They were Elvis's fans. They all really loved Elvis when they were younger. Yeah, and how they got together and how they used to dress the same. It even covers when John Lennon mentions that the Beatles are more popular than Jesus, and that really pissed off religious people very highly, and they started doing doing album burnings of the albums memorabilia. And then they continued on after that, and it goes to how they put different albums together and how they went from dressing the same to dressing differently, up to that roof, the performance on the roof, which is a really famous thing. I really love that thing. And then they even covered the John Lennon assassination and George Harrison dying in 2001 from cancer, and a little bit about Ringo and Paul afterwards. And yeah, it's pretty interesting. Now, interesting fact, the song Julia on the White Album is actually about John Lennon's mother. He wrote that song because his mother died on his 18th birthday. She was hit by a car. He didn't get brought up with his mother. He was brought up by his aunt Mimi, but he knew his mother, and she was more like a friend. More. She wasn't like a parent. She was more like a sister to him. And when she died, it like really hit him. That's why we get the song Julia, and it's a really beautiful song. If you've never heard that song, it's really fantastic. I really like that a lot. Then I read Who is Henry Ford? And he has another interesting story as well. When he was a teenager, he seen somebody with a plow. I think it was a plow, and it was a steam engine plow that wasn't connected to a train track. And when he was fascinated with it, and he was also fascinated with working on watches and stuff. He was really big into mechanics, so it inspired him to work on automobiles. And he had, like prototypes, and then it went to cars. He had a quad cycle, I believe they called it. It was like the earlier version of the car, and then it went to the the A model car, and then he had the T model Ford. But an interesting thing, and I got a kick out of this part of the story, is that he had a shed that he was working in that he built, and he came up with, I think, the A model Ford, and the door was too small to fit the car through, so he had to knock down the wall to get the car out, aka he invented the garage at the same time. Yes, and then it gets into the T model Ford and how they revolutionized manufacturing of automobiles. Yeah, and how he thought that gasoline engines was a lot better than the steam engine, and he was right. And at the time when he started making the T model Ford, everybody could get one. He made it really affordable, and so it's really cool. And then he actually was a person that first raised wages. People were making $2.50 a day, and then he started paying people $5 a day. And then later on, though, he started having strikes and some problems. Yeah, and it's a really interesting story. I really liked his story. Of course, there's a lot more information I could cover, but I don't want to make this video too long. Trust me, these books are jam-packed with wonderful information. You can learn so much by reading these little books. And the last one I read that I completed was Who Was Walt Disney? Yes, and he's, everybody knows who Disney is. They know the company Disney, but it started off with him and his brother Roy. It was first the Disney Brothers, but then it became the Disney company by itself. Interesting fact, when he was very young, when he was in school, he caught a mouse, and he took a string, made a leash for the mouse, and took it to school. And the teacher got angry, but the kids loved it. And this guy had a big sense of humor, man. He was really great. And he created a character, and then somebody kind of stole that character from him. And then he came up with Mickey Mouse. Now, the first Mickey Mouse cartoon is called Plain Crazy, and it's a really excellent cartoon. I highly suggest that you look it up on YouTube and watch this cartoon. It's actually really, really funny, and it's done really, really well. And I believe that came out before Steamboat Willie, and that is like, they actually took that. If you ever watched a lot of Disney stuff, you got that little clip of Steamboat Willie. Yeah, and then it gets into him making Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which was a wonderful cartoon, and how there was a cartoon first to where he was able to make a cartoon in color, and then he made Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and they didn't think it was going to be popular because nobody could sit through a long cartoon, but it became a big success. And then he made other movies. They weren't as successful as Snow White, but they did well enough. But then when World War I think World War II came around, people weren't able to make, you had the Great Depression first, and then you had World War II that happened, and he had to actually, instead of making cartoons for entertainment, he had to do war propaganda to inspire people to want to fight, And then after that, he went back into making movies, and then it gets into him making the Disney World, Disneyland amusement parks, and it's really interesting. You have a lot with his family life and everything, and it was really interesting. I really enjoyed this book a lot. A lot of fun, yeah. And Disney was great. He had a great sense of humor, and you gotta love him. Now, the next children books that I'm reading, I started on this one. This is Return of the Jedi, but this is Beware of the Power of the Dark Side. And this is a retelling of Return of the Jedi. And this is told a little bit differently. It's told in a style, kind of reminds me of Chuck Palahniuk style. It's a very entertaining way of writing this story, because this isn't somebody that officially did this. This was a Star Wars fan, and you could tell, man. I'm very early in the book, but it's really excellent so far, and I'm going to tell that I'm going to really enjoy that a lot. And since I'm reading that, I've got this bridge book of Return of the Jedi. I plan on reading after that. And then I've got this Return of the Jedi book that I plan on reading after that. These are kind of shorter. This isn't the actual novel. I've already read the actual novel, but these, I believe I've read this when I was a kid. I've had this picture book before when I was a kid, but, this is still, I'm considering this my children's literature. This might be a reread, though, but that's all right. And this might be a reread as well. I'm going to read this short version of The Empire Strikes Back. I'm a big Star Wars fan. If you come to this channel often, you'll definitely hear a couple things about Star Wars, because I am a huge Star Wars fan. I love those movies. They're fantastic. So that's it. Though that's my reading adventures. I've had some really good ones, and I want to thank you for being here. If you can, let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. If you can, hit the like button. That means a ton to me. Those like buttons mean a lot to me. And if you want to see more, subscribe and all that good stuff. So that's about it. I'm Peter the Book Lover. Please come by and check out more of my videos in the future. And I hope to see you in the next video. See you next time.